Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to be talking about the Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki, narrated by Ruth Ozeki and Carrie Shale. This is a strange book with a little bit of postmodern-esque to it. This is a book about a boy named Benny O who has just suffered the tragic loss of his father. He's 14 years old and he's on the spectrum somewhat. We don't know exactly where he is situated because we also know that he's able to hear and at least ostensibly speak to objects, like any object, inanimate objects. And so there's a lot of supposition about where he is mental health wise and where he is on the spectrum. And it's part of the story that we interrogate exactly some of those aspects through the lens of peripheral characters and predominantly his mother, Annabelle. The story starts off with the father dying, and it goes into a little bit of backstory, how Annabelle met the father, how they fell in love, and then his tragic death and sort of what that does to her. Clearly, it's an identity-shattering event, but she has to take care of her son who has some very special needs at some points and sort of defies categorization and diagnosis. Generally, the chapters will alternate between Annabelle and Benny. We do have a peripheral thing where we do sometimes get narration of a monk who is in training and overseeing a temple that is rapidly deteriorating while she is caring for her master, essentially. I can't remember the exact term, abbot, maybe, while he is actually dying as well. And that all comes together in the end as well. But in the beginning, there's a lot of these disparate threads that are being tugged on, and you just sort of have to go with it. I think some readers will be able to, and others will bail on it fairly early, because I wouldn't say plot-wise, not that much happens even throughout it. It survives quite a bit on characterization and the sort of like mystery, I guess, of Benny and what he is going through and what that sort of means. And then it becomes even more weird, I guess, when the book has its own chapter narrating to the reader what this book is about. Ostensibly, we are reading that book, which is talking to us about what kind of book it is. So we will get a chapter, and then the book will say, oh, I bet you think, you're reading this kind of book, and Benny is going down this kind of path, but that's not what kind of book this is. And gradually, the book has more voice as the book becomes an inanimate character that Benny himself has a dialogue with. And there's some tension between Benny conforming to the structure of the actual story, like tropes, essentially, and what will happen in his story, how much agency he has, or kind of like acquiescing and going with the flow. And then it gets a little bit more weird. So he also ends up running away from home a couple times, and he meets a vagrant who is 2 or 3 years older than him, I think. I can't remember what her name is. No, it's Alice. And her stage name, her artist name, is the Aleph, which is a story that Borges has crafted even within this universe. And so we get this other sort of postmodern element where she is herself a story. All people are stories that they tell themselves, basically. And people construct the story that is themselves by interacting with other people who give them information and then can incorporate that into their story. So without the lens of other people, people are not being seen fully, and therefore their story is incomplete. And so she herself, being the embodiment of this principle in the story, is interesting. I haven't actually read The Aleph, and I bet I would get more out of it if I had. There's a bunch of allusions to it, but it does sort of explain exactly what happens in the story, which just makes it more sort of three-dimensional when you're interacting with it. He also makes friends with a poet who is homeless and very big on philosophy, especially Russian philosophy, and he sort of poses to Benny what his particular question in life is, which is what is real, what is reality. So Benny is trying to cope with the loss of his father, construct an identity, figure out what is wrong with him, what is neurodivergent about him, if he's mentally ill, all of these kind of things. And then the mother's chapters are her just trying to keep it together, get work, clean the house, hold on to some scrap vestiges of like her former identity, mourn her husband. So it's a very affecting story. I think there's a lot to hold on to there. Definitely not too much plot-wise though. It's a slow-moving book. What this book primarily had to say specifically to me is it made me think about who has agency in our actual lives, the people who can assert not dominance but influence us, particularly in the stories of our own lives, the importance of stories and what a story is itself, basically. Like the book in its own chapter puts to us that the primary sort of dominant life form might be books or stories specifically. They plant themselves in the human mind. They propagate like that. They're in a telephone game being told and retold, and new stories are born, new books are born. And so there's this idea that a story is not so different than an actual person in reality who tells a story of themselves, something that if you've seen my channel, I definitely jive with. The difference between a fictional character and my view of a person that I've interacted with is not so different for me. Yes, my processing of them is different. My body responds differently to them, but ultimately identity is constructed in much the same way through stories. And since I don't interact with too many people physically, for me it's even more of like a bleeding edge, and so I like this theme quite a bit. But it also makes you think a lot about systemic issues in society, such as in the case of Benny and Annabelle, the social worker that asserts herself and the psychiatrist who asserts herself onto Benny when he is like sent to a mental institution, basically. I don't know what year this is exactly, I can't remember. But he has to deal with the psychiatrist, and to get out, he has to talk to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist has to diagnose them. So the psychiatrist has a lot of agency over Benny, asserting a particular story on him, which is these things that he speaks to may not be real. And then as the course of the story goes, we find out that the Aleph and the homeless poet and all them, they may or may not be real, but who gets to say they are real is ultimately the psychiatrist, which means that Benny and Annabelle have to conform to society. The social worker that is the sort of, I don't know, primary antagonist, you could say, of Annabelle, though there isn't, it's not, it would be a mistake to cast her as a villain, I'll say, but Annabelle has to prove her worth, her particular worthiness as a mother, to have like a nurturing environment for Benny, as well as adjudicate her own space in order to make Benny more comfortable all of the time, and you know, allow for her identity to be consumed or subsumed, and also to go out of her comfort zone quite a lot of the time and take some pretty traumatic abuse from Benny as well. But also she is judged in these like very weird niche ways that feel like they're no-win scenarios by the social worker. So again, Annabelle's story becomes what society wants it to become about, if she can fulfill these certain obligations, if she can surmount these particular conflicts, when without those things interacting with her, who knows what her story could be. So I find it really interesting. I like the book quite a bit. I gave it 5 stars. I loved what it elicited in me, basically, and what it makes me think about. When it comes to books about ideas and thoughts and stuff, this is, again, my jam. I really like thinking about these things in particular, so this felt like a book for me. I will caveat this, that I was going to give it 4 stars because the audiobook narration is both good and bad. The narrator is really good at slipping in and out of characters, but he routinely makes women sound kind of like tropey and dumb, especially Annabelle, which is very frustrating for me. She sounds sort of like lispy and very feminine and sort of airy, which feels, again, sort of like taking agency away from her. When he voices Asian characters, he does the dialect, and that might be because it's written in dialect in the book, but I effing hate that. And so when it's even verbalized, it's even worse for me because it's a white guy trying to... Obviously, it's problematic and it's annoying, so I don't know why people do that. However, otherwise, when he's voicing the book in particular, he goes into a specific cadence, and you get like a really interesting play with the text that way, because I don't know if it's specifically written in a different dialect on the text, probably not, I'm guessing, but the delineation between Betty's thoughts and when the book interjects makes it really apparent on audio, and sort of makes it known when he is kind of like consumed by the book, and the book is the one having agency and narration, and when Benny is. So if you don't like dialect, just be aware that this book goes into it quite a bit. The father who died is Asian, so anytime he is voiced, I believe he was Japanese, he has that in dialect. I will definitely be picking up another Ruth Ozeki book. A Tale for Time Being is on my bookshelf right now. If you've read any of the other books, feel free to recommend them. If you've read this book in particular, I'd love to have a discussion about it, as you could probably tell from this video. And otherwise, I will catch you later. Bye.